Rocking the market, Chery is now back to do it again. And their first launch of the year will be this, the Tiggo Cross, which we're driving today as a turbo and as what might be Malaysia's most affordable hybrid. Now, before we get into the drive, let's cover a few basics. The Tiggo Cross will enter the market as the most compact Chery yet, with dimensions that put it as a sort of A+, B- segment sort of thing, competing against vehicles like the Honda WRV, as well as to some extent the PROTON X50, as well as the Perodua Ativa. Now, up front, this car can be had with either a 1.5-litre turbocharged engine mated to a 6-speed dual-clutch automatic gearbox, or that same 1.5-litre without a turbo mated to an electric motor. Now, in terms of power outputs, there are significant differences between the two, but most importantly, in terms of overall performance time, 0 to 100 in the hybrid can be completed in under 9 seconds, whereas it takes a little bit over 10 seconds for this turbo. Now, visually, the cars are almost identical. You get full LED headlights up front, replete with an LED daytime running light down here. You get a newly redesigned Chery expanding Cosmos grille, replete with these little diamond studs, which we saw before from the Chery Auto 5. But a lot of the design here is meant to emphasize the width of this car. As we move further down the side, the turbo model will run 18-inch alloy wheels, which will, at least on these cars, be wrapped in GT Comfort 520 tires, although the hybrid uses 17-inch alloys wrapped in Silone rubber. Yeah. Anyway, these cars will also come with keyless entry and go, as well as a what they refer to as near to unlock, far to lock, which we call a proximity key. But more importantly, there are sensors on the door itself in order to lock and unlock the car if you choose to disable that feature. Now, looking down the side, this is where you do realize that this car is quite small, which is part of the reason why, for example, there is no quarter light back here, instead just a black panel to give it a floating roof effect. But overall, this car does look decently modern. Now, at the rear, assuming my videographer doesn't smack into a tree, there is a full-width LED light bar replete with LED indicators as well. You get the Chery badging up here and Tiggo Cross kind of over here. Tiggo Cross, see? Small. Now, if you were to get the hybrid, there is a CSH badge somewhere around here, which stands for Chery Super Hybrid, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we actually drive the cars. Behind this tailgate, which is not powered as standard, although I assume that you can probably fit some powered struts there, you have a pretty good amount of space. Now, the floor in this car has been lowered slightly, so there is a little bit of a lip, but I can confidently say that this is broadly on par with the amount of space that you get in something like a Perodua Ativa or a Honda WRV. And of course, you can fold the rear seats flat 60/40 for added practicality. But most importantly, underneath the boot floor, you will still find a space-saver spare wheel, in this case supplied by Linglong. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the exterior of this car does look decently good, and given the fact that this car is estimated to be somewhere between 80 to 95,000 ringgit, I think that the overall exterior package of this car does look pretty appealing. But to me, I think it's this interior that really takes my breath away, simply because for a car that's competing in the sub 100,000 ringgit space, or at least as expected to be, the interior material quality is very impressive. You get a lot of faux leather up here on the dash, replete with stitching, more faux leather down here, again with more stitching, more faux leather here, more faux leather here, lots of soft touch materials, and there's even an ambient lighting system in here. Again, for a car at this price point, that is very impressive indeed. Now, in terms of the overall interior appointments, things appear to be pretty good. As you can see, I have a powered driver's seat replete with lumbar for the hybrid. I get 2 digital instrument clusters up here, one to handle my instrumentation and one to handle my infotainment. This will also offer wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, as well as a voice assistant, which obviously you don't get in the Honda or the Perodua. Moving further down, you still get physical air conditioning vents, thank God. But moving beyond that, there are also a set of shortcut keys in order to control specific functions within the car. You have a home key for the screen, as well as your volume buttons and so on and so forth. But more importantly, you also have your drive mode selector and your around view monitor to trigger this car's 540-degree surround view camera, which is just a 360-degree camera, which also stitches some stuff underneath the car. Moving down beyond that, you also get a dual zone climate control system, controllable via this touch-sensitive panel here. Now, of course, the fact that this is a touch panel is a bit bittersweet, but at least it's not in the screen, which is certainly nice to see. And more importantly, it should allow for much faster manipulation of your specific functions, things like your fan speed and your temperature and so on and so forth. Moving further down, you also have physical controls, again, for your fan speed and temperature, which means that this doesn't really matter at all. Nice chunky gear lever here. And moving further back, there is a sort of rubberized holder here, which appears to be designed for a phone. So if you put it there, it doesn't wobble around. A couple of cup holders here, not the biggest things in the world. Decently sized center console bin here. There is an air conditioning vent down here, which means that this is also a cooled center console bin. You get more space underneath the center console. You get a decent amount of space in the glove box. There's a decent amount of space in the door cards. And overall, this space does seem to be very cleverly designed. Now, in terms of other appointments, this car also comes with a 6-speaker audio system as standard, regardless of which variant you go for. But no matter how much money you spend on a Tiggo Cross, there is no sunroof or panoramic roof available, which I suppose is fine because I think for most people, they don't really care. Now, in the back of the Tiggo Cross, life is a bit bittersweet because with the front seats are in my driving position, about 170 centimeters, you can see I have a good amount of knee room and a pretty decent amount of headroom at that. But as you can probably tell, I don't have that much in terms of under-thigh support if I'm not stretching my legs out. As you can see, the seat base is quite flat, which means that they're not coming up to support the furthest part of my thighs. And I do have to stretch out underneath the seats in front of me in order to get any semblance of under-thigh support. However, the turbo model that we're in now still enjoys a flat floor, which means that if you have to put 3 passengers abreast back here, it's not that bad. And more importantly, if you have 2 passengers, you'll be able to enjoy the single rear air conditioning vent, the single USB-A port, as well as this deployable center armrest replete with cup holders. Now, one thing that I would like to point out is the fact that while this feels very solid indeed, the door cards, however, have taken a slight hit over the ones in the front because this is now hard plastic and it's soft touch down here with more stitching, which means that where you do touch at least is nice and comfy, but up here is a bit harder wearing, perhaps better for family use. Now, of course, the interior appointments in this car, which is again the Tiggo Cross Turbo, will be shared with the hybrid. These cars share almost exactly the same specifications, sans one missing airbag on the interior and 1-inch smaller wheels on the exterior. But I'm told that these two cars drive very, very differently, which means that without further ado, let's move on to the test drives. So the first car we're getting into today is the Tiggo Cross Turbo. Now, this car runs a 1.5-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, which produces a little bit under 150 PS and about 210 Newton meters of torque. Now, one of the things I find interesting about this powertrain is that that engine is mated to a 6-speed dual-clutch automatic gearbox rather than a CVT. The standard fit, or rather the de rigueur within this segment, is a CVT automatic gearbox. It's also what we saw from the ABDULLAH 5. So the fact that Chery has decided to go for a dual clutch automatic gearbox in this car rather than a more affordable and potentially more efficient CVT does seem to signal to me that Chery is taking driver and owner feedback very seriously. Now, from the get-go, the engine is somewhat audible when you're trying to move off the line. This 1.5-litre turbocharged engine we suspect is shared with the ABDULLAH 5, but has a slightly different tune to it, no doubt, in order to sort of improve powertrain response from behind the wheel, and that does seem to be quite evident to me, even as I set off now. In normal mode, putting my foot down does reveal that this car achieves peak torque quite easily and quite quickly at that, which means that takeoff is relatively urgent. Now, obviously, the benefit of using a smaller turbocharged powertrain is that there are efficiency gains to be had, especially when you're stuck, for example, in traffic like we are now, or it's like a traffic light, where when you're idling, it does consume a little bit less fuel. But of course, if you have a naturally aspirated engine, response should be a little bit better. However, it does seem quite clear to me that this powertrain has been set up in order to reduce that input lag, as it were, in order to make this car feel a little bit more attentive, a little bit easier, a little bit more reasonable to drive on a day-to-day basis. So one of the areas that Chery has had some degree of weakness has actually been in terms of brake feel. This was first reported in the ABDULLAH 5, although it was fixed for the Tiggo 8 Pro as well as the Tiggo 7 Pro. And stepping into the Tiggo Cross, although this is meant to be the most affordable or entry-level Chery model, it most certainly doesn't feel that from behind the wheel in terms of how the driver controls have been set up for this car. It does feel like a much more well-engineered product than what we've seen before. And while that might seem like a little bit of criticism, it seems quite clear that Chery Auto Malaysia is moving very quickly and progressing very quickly and learning quickly from model to model, which means that, again, this does bode well as we see more vehicles from the Chery group moving forward, because it means that they will learn faster and make those changes based on customer feedback even faster still. Now, of course, the Chery Tiggo Cross will be available with very comprehensive safety features from the get-go as standard. So you don't have to buy into the hybrid. Even this turbo model will still come with things like adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, rear cross-traffic alert, and a 540-degree camera, which means that, again, this should be a decently and comprehensively equipped family car, good enough to do family duties. But of course, if you want level 2.5 semi-autonomy, you will need to step into the Tiggo Cross Hybrid for that. But I feel that given the targeted price point or estimated price points for these cars, which should be under 90,000 ringgit, or under 95,000 ringgit rather, for the hybrid, and under 95,000 ringgit, well under 95,000 ringgit for this turbo, it should mean that for buyers within this segment who have previously potentially been shortchanged by other crossovers competing within this space, this car should offer all the features that you might want or need while still maintaining that very competitive price point. Now that we're on a slightly more open stretch of road, doing about 70 kilometers an hour, I can say that this car is decently refined. In terms of road noise, the GT Comfort tires are doing a pretty decent job at reducing the amount of roar getting into the cabin, although obviously in terms of wind noise we can't really do that because we are driving on urban roads and therefore we can't hit the speeds necessary in order to test overall wind refinement. But as far as I'm concerned, this does feel like a decently positive experience so far. This car feels like something that's being built to a slightly higher price point. This is no doubt as a result of Chery's extensive localization efforts, which is something like 30% from the get-go for this car. And of course, these cars will be CKD from point of launch, which means that, again, there has been significant local input into these cars prior to launch, which is perhaps why this car feels as well put together as it does compared to vehicles like the GAC M-Zoom GS3, if I recall that name correctly, and other vehicles within this space. More importantly, it does remain to be seen if this car will be able to put up a convincing fight against vehicles like the Perodua Ativa and the PROTON X50, and therefore, by extension, vehicles like the Honda WRV. So now we're driving the hybrid. Now, of course, between the two cars, this is the naturally more powerful variant, but of course, that's not how Chery is billing it. Instead, this is meant to be the car that offers the best balance between performance and day-to-day efficiency. Now, in terms of the hybrid setup, there is a 1.5-litre naturally aspirated engine up front, which acts primarily as a generator to create power for the 1.8 kilowatt-hour battery that feeds the electric motor. Now, much like what we saw from, say, Honda's EHEV system, the primary drive in this car is provided via the electric motor, which means that when you put your foot down, all of that motive force primarily again comes from that motor. As a result, this car takes off the line with a certain degree of urgency that we normally associate with EVs, which makes this car feel a lot more punchy and a lot more attentive than a naturally aspirated 1.5-litre engine might. Furthermore, because this car uses a dedicated hybrid transmission, or DHT, it also means that that power transmission moves quite quickly as well. There's no CVT in order to sort of delay that power transmission at all, unlike what you get from, say, a Perodua Ativa hybrid. Now that the road is slightly clearer, putting my foot down and sort of kicking up about as much power as this powertrain will give me, it's quite clear that although the engine does kick in to provide a little bit more electricity for that battery, it never feels very intrusive. They've done a lot to insulate the engine from the cabin, which means that this interior still feels relatively refined even at higher engine speeds, normally when you hear an engine scream, for example. And of course, the fact that the majority of the torque is being provided by the electric motor, it also means that this engine doesn't have to spin at its maximum speed, which I'm sure does a lot to ensure that this cabin remains relatively quiet. Now, out of pure curiosity, the Tiggo Cross appears to be the only Chery in Malaysia at the moment that doesn't offer acoustic glass for at least the front half of the cabin, if not the entirety of the car. Now, although some may see that as a little bit of a detraction, other vehicles within this segment also don't offer acoustic glass, but more importantly, I have a feeling that this should be refined enough for urban driving and for day-to-day usability. Now, in terms of the way this powertrain is executed, it's quite clear that the handover between the electric powertrain and the combustion motor seems to occur very smoothly. And more importantly, because of that DHT, it feels like the power is sort of endless. You're not getting stepped by a gearbox, you're not being held back by a CVT, which does seem to make this car feel, again, a little bit more attentive, a little bit more alert from behind the wheel. Now, of course, today's test drive is relatively limited, which means that we won't really have the opportunity to try this car out at higher speed. We won't really have an opportunity to test this car's high-speed refinement either. But for a first drive or a first look at the Tiggo Cross, it does feel like this car seems to be relatively well specified, and I think this powertrain especially is of particular note because this has the potential to be the most affordable hybrid on the Malaysian market. And if it does manage to do that, I've no doubt that this car will appeal to those looking for something a little bit more practical than, say, a compact saloon like, say, a Toyota Vios or a Honda City, but may not necessarily want to stretch into something like a Toyota Corolla Cross or perhaps a Honda WRV. And more importantly, by offering this Chery Super Hybrid or CSH system, it should mean that you enjoy better fuel economy where it matters, where the majority of urban buyers will be spending their time, which is in traffic jams. Now, we have a pretty lucky opportunity to have Michael Chu, the Vice President of Chery Auto Malaysia, in the car with us. Possibly because he didn't trust my driving with his new car. But in any case, that also gives us the opportunity to put him in a slightly more uncomfortable position than we're in. So firstly, Michael, thank you very much for joining us in this very impromptu interview session. No questions were prepared, nothing was prompted, there was no warning to this at all, and I can assure you that my nerves are probably somewhere a bit higher than yours at the moment. But since I have you, there are a few questions with regards to Chery's general national strategy that I'd like to talk about, because I think a lot of consumers are a bit concerned when it comes to Chery as a brand. Obviously, this is not the first time the Chery brand has been in Malaysia. Their first going at it was less than successful, if we put it gently. And so there is some concern that Chery will just do it again, where they may just up and disappear. So to that end, what has Chery Auto Malaysia been doing for the last couple of years in order to sort of cement its position in the market?
I think that's a good question actually, and also as in typical fashion, you always give me the toughest question on the first round. This is a very critical moment for us. We got great products and also upcoming our first foray into a sub 100,000 ringgit segment. We have 53 operational dealers, and majority of the dealers are 3S, and meaning that the 3S with some of it are 4S. So, meaning that most of our dealers are able to support the comprehensive after sales and service, because it's very important to know that we start off with great products, great sales, compelling prices, and great technology for the mass market. The next step would be to offer great after sales and service. Okay. We have been putting heavy focus on that, making sure that our dealers have the information and also the support that we need from Chery Malaysia. So our customer service are also on hand, answering every question. And also this is also part of our vision that when you buy a Chery, you do not just buy a car or SUV. You actually buy into a lifestyle. This is where we have the WCWL that we engage the customers on every month, every quarter at the local dealers.
That actually leads me on to my next question, which has actually to do with WCWL. Now, in terms of after-sales support, in terms of customer support, in terms of customer recognition by brands, we have noticed that Chery Auto Malaysia has seemingly gone above and beyond in order to ensure that their customers feel like they are heard by the brand, like they are seen by the brand. Of course, there have been a myriad of events in order to celebrate your customer base, in order to get them closer to the brand and get to understand their products a little bit better. Things like, for example, driver training events that we saw in Satya City, as well as various other slightly more lifestyle geared events that sort of just, again, make them feel a little bit closer to the brand. Can we understand, what I'd like to know is, what was the strategy behind doing that? Because obviously that's not something that a lot of car makers do here, especially not in the mass market space. So what was the logic and the thinking behind bringing the customers closer to the brand?
I think what's important is the voice of the customer has to be constantly positive.
Okay.
Because when you have a positive feeling about the brand, the product, and also the whole sales and service experience in our ecosystem, naturally you bring your relatives and friends, closer to us, and these actions indirectly generate more publicity for us, more walk-in traffic to our showroom, and more engagement at our local events. Okay. And with these, I think that it is a costly way, but it is a very lasting way to get the customers in organically.
Right. Okay. Well, that's been very insightful. And now that we're back at our original venue, so thank you very, very much again, Michael, for spending your time and choosing to sit with us here, trapped, and face the questions that we might give you, regardless of how comfortable you might be. But more importantly, I think that it's quite clear that from the Tiggo Cross that we're driving today, we can see that there's been growth. From the first models into the newer models, we can see there's been small improvements, incremental improvements over time. And ultimately, the fact that we are potentially getting the most affordable hybrid in the market, potentially, when this car launches.
Yeah.
Maybe something under 90,000 ringgit. Possibly.
I didn't hear that.
And if the car does come in at that sort of price point, I have no doubt that this should be very attractive for consumers looking for a compact, daily drivable sort of urban SUV that can offer a degree of efficiency, a degree of refinement that might not necessarily be available in the market at the moment. So again, thank you very much for your time. We certainly appreciate the candor of the answers as well.
Thank you so much, and I'll have my guys prepare the booking agreement on the table when you get back.
Now, after having driven the Tiggo Cross both as a turbo and as a hybrid, one thing is very clear. Although this is going to be Chery's most affordable entry-level model, this car is certainly pulling no punches. Both the turbo and the hybrid have their pros and cons, but both of them seem to offer a pretty solid value package. Now, in terms of packages and the prices and the warranties, we can't talk about that just yet because obviously these cars are not launched yet. However, we do expect these cars to arrive in our market sometime within the next 3 to 4 weeks. As such, be sure to stay tuned to the channel to get more updates from us. But that concludes our media preview drive of the new Chery Tiggo Cross. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can click the link below to join our new WhatsApp channel so you stay up to date with the very latest developments from the Malaysian automotive industry. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care and stay safe.